You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 26th of August 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from Dufourstrasse 90 in Zurich, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, when is an escalation not an escalation?
Hezbollah's ongoing aggression risks dragging the people of Lebanon, the people of Israel, and the whole region into a wider escalation. And we are ready to do everything we need to defend the people of Israel.
We'll examine this weekend's exchange of fire between Israel and Hezbollah and ask how much further will this go. Also ahead, in the next 60 minutes, the Olympic truce is over as France's president looks at forming a government. We'll find out why his task is so great. Plus the latest on the knife attack in Solingen as a 26-year-old man believed to be Syrian is arrested. We'll go through this morning's Swiss papers and take a look at the highlights from the Edinburgh Fringe Festival too. That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from Zurich. First, though, a look at what else is happening in today's news. Hamas says it has rejected new conditions put forward by Israel in the latest talks to try to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza, casting further doubt on the chances of a breakthrough in efforts to end the 10-month-old war. The Reuters news agency says one of its staff covering the war in Ukraine is missing and has been killed, presumably after a strike on a hotel in the east of the country. And the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said negotiations are ongoing with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey and Switzerland regarding a second summit on peace. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, overnight on Sunday, Israel launched what it called preemptive strikes on Hezbollah targets inside Lebanon. Hezbollah said it responded by firing 320 rockets and drones at Israel in retaliation for the assassination of a senior commander. It immediately raised fears of an escalation in the conflict in the region, but are we still some way away from this? Well, I'm joined in the studio here in Zurich by Elham Manea, who's a Swiss Yemeni writer and professor of political science at the Political Science Institute at Zurich University. And on the line from Jerusalem is Nimrod Goren, who's senior fellow for Israeli affairs at the Middle East Institute and the founder of the Israeli foreign policy think tank Mitvim. A very good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us. Elham, let's just begin with a recap of this weekend's events. Israel's preemptive strike, Hezbollah retaliating for the death of one of its commanders.
Okay, and I think it would be basically, we can say it's a recalibrated kind of form of attack. Hezbollah is not interested in a wider regional war. It focused on military targets and with that sending a clear message, and that was also clear in Hezbollah, Nasrallah.
And Nimrod, just explain to us what reports you were hearing when you from your position in Jerusalem.
Reports were really contradicting each other early on yesterday morning because when Israelis woke up very early in the morning, it seems like we are on the brink of a war with Hezbollah, with the massive Israeli attack, the preventive attack on whatever Hezbollah tried to do. But several hours later, it was quite clear that both sides are sending very clear public messaging that it's game over for now in terms of the regional escalation. And unfortunately, they are going back to this war of attrition that has been lasting for the past 10 months and still has no end in sight, even if a regional war has been averted for now.
Because Nimrod has got a point, hasn't he, Elham? The fact that when these attacks started, the immediate word that sprang to everybody's mind was escalation. And yet after a few hours, it seemed to have calmed down. I mean, are we looking at a situation now where there was a threat of escalation, but this will actually now not manifest itself?
Well, I think all parties to this conflict are not interested in a regional war. Israel included, Hezbollah included, Iran included. And from their perspective, right now, the main thing is to get, I'm talking about Iran and Hezbollah, from their perspective, they would like to see an end in the war in Gaza. And from an Israeli perspective, one sees that here it's more complicated, specifically because when it comes to the ceasefire, there are difficulties within the government of Israel itself on how far and how to progress.
And just explain a little bit further these difficulties, Nimrod. It is very much an internal problem, isn't it, as well as an external one?
But I think it's important to take what Ilham said in mind, that both sides, or all sides, do not really want a regional flare-up. And that goes against a lot of analysis that we hear in the international stage, accusing one side of the other of really pushing for a regional war. I think everybody understands that there are consequences of that and wants to prevent that, including the international mediators that basically used the Gaza ceasefire talks in order to postpone and give time for diplomacy to contain the Iran and Hezbollah attack. But now that that attack has been foiled or postponed or contained, the question is what's happening with Gaza, because Netanyahu, and I'm talking about the Israeli side, we also have obstacles on Hamas side, Netanyahu doesn't seem to want to go all in for a ceasefire deal that goes beyond like the immediate humanitarian phase. So he's not living up to the expectations of the mediators of Hamas. And that's also because of domestic political calculation in terms of his political survival or position within his coalition, but also I think based on ideological thinking of his about the future of Gaza, on how he sees that and how he wants to maintain Israeli security presence in strategic parts of the Gaza Strip, which all others, including the majority of the Israeli public, are willing to give up on for the sake of returning their hostages back home and reaching a ceasefire.
And this, Elham, poses enormous pressure on those who are trying to bring about some sort of a ceasefire. I mean, we have a high level, we had the talks last week, nothing has happened from there. We have a high level delegation due to meet in Cairo later today. And at the back of this, here is Washington saying, urging an escalation not to take place this weekend and urging the push towards a ceasefire to continue.
Yes, and the United States seems to be the only party who's in fact optimistic about the possibility of reaching a ceasefire. And the problem is that we have on both sides those who are trying to torpedo a form of a ceasefire, whether from the far-right members inside of Netanyahu government or from the side of Hamas, specifically from Yahya Sinwar.
Tell us, Nimrod, a little bit more about where these talks go next. We've had the US Air Force General C.Q. Brown, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, making a surprise visit at the end of last week and staying in the Middle East. How much do you think that there will be some sort of impetus, given what happened at the weekend between Israel and Hezbollah, knowing that on the margins of the central war between Hamas and Israel, there are several players who could at any point see this whole conflict tip into something much wider?
I think the visits of American security officials were mostly geared into coordination of Israeli actions and containment of threats by the Iran axis, not necessarily to the ceasefire talk, because those have been going on with the other mediators, CIAs, Bill Burns, and others that are engaged with that. Over the last couple of weeks, we did see a significant push by the mediators. We saw the meeting in Doha, we saw the meeting in Cairo, we saw delegation going back and forth. There was some, like Ilham says, some sense of optimism conveyed by American mediators. But when you look at the substance, you don't see any diplomatic progress. You do see willingness by all the sides to continue the talks, even after the Cairo meeting. Yesterday, the sense is that working levels will continue talking, keep on working, but it doesn't really seem to lead anywhere. And when Netanyahu visited Washington a month ago, the Americans was really pointing out publicly that if within 1 month they do not see progress, they will go public and say why this is not happening and who is to blame. And will this happen? Will we hear more clarity about the reasons for the failure? Or will these talks continue and linger for more and more time without actually bringing progress? And by not bringing progress, they are basically enabling the volatile situation on the ground to continue, and the chance for escalation, whether on Gaza or with Lebanon, to be still relevant.
And just to add to what Namrud just said, I actually see also there are also other factors that are playing to this complex picture, specifically when we see, for instance, Egypt is a mediator, but at the same time party with the whole issue and negotiation about the Philadelphia corridor. And Egypt is willing to make concessions, but not so much that it will reflect on its own national security. And all of these factors really reflect in a manner that makes a possibility of a ceasefire, I'm not going to say it's far-fetched, but really difficult.
Just to clarify, just the Philadelphia corridor is that tiny strip of land that's between Egypt and Gaza. Is that correct?
Exactly.
So just looking ahead, Nimrod, I mean, we've seen Hamas in the last 24 hours saying it's rejecting new Israeli conditions. Where does this go next?
I think there needs to be some assessment by the mediators on the way forward, because these talks have been going on for almost 8 months, around the same formula, within the same mediation structure, and they don't lead to the progress that has been anticipated. So I think the mediators should consider whether the formula is a feasible one, whether it's something that the current leadership of the sides are willing to agree. And if the sides are not willing to agree, are the mediators willing to put more leverage and pressure in order to make them agree? Until now, this is not happening. And based on what Hela mentioned, do we have the right mediators in the room? Maybe there are other countries, other actors who can contribute. So really continuing as is for a much longer time, I don't think will bring much benefit. In parallel to finding a new way to the Gaza talks, I think should be more investment on the Israel-Lebanon issue on its own, because until now, negotiations or diplomatic arrangements for Israel-Hezbollah diffusion of tension was linked to a ceasefire in Gaza. But what happens if a ceasefire in Gaza is not reached within the next weeks or months? What happens to the situation between Israel and Hezbollah? How do we engage Israelis and Lebanese who are willing to work towards a better future and have them talk to each other, develop day after plans, and develop arrangements that can have people from both sides of the border come back home, because this lasts for a long time. And at least on the Israeli side, until we have elections and have a new leadership, and that again will happen way into next year at least, we won't see ideological changes. So it's up to the mediators to really engage in a more effective way and not neglect what's happening in the north, even when, like we said at the beginning, the current crisis may have been averted.
Nimrod Gorin in Jerusalem and Elham Manea here in Zurich. Thank you both for joining me on The Globalist. You're listening to Monocle Radio.
Thank you.
It's 8:12 a.m. here in Zurich, the same time in Paris, and one would hope that the political truce that France enjoyed during the Olympic Games would last well into the period of the Paralympics, which start later this week. Well, if only, because the political battles are striking up again as the President Emmanuel Macron faces the huge task of forming a government, having held snap parliamentary elections before the summer. At the end of last week, France's left-wing parties told Monsieur Macron on Friday that they want to take the lead in doing all this. To find out more, I'm joined by Florence Biedermann, journalist and political analyst, who joins us on the line from Paris. A very good morning to you, Florence.
Good morning, Emma.
Good to have you with us. Just there was this lovely sort of hiatus of the Olympic Games in July and August, which made us all step back blissfully from the mess that was created at the beginning of July.
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of parenthesis, but now it's back to business. I mean, Emmanuel Macron convoked those snap elections, which his party, Renaissance, lost. And now he has to nominate a prime minister that will be able to form a government, let's say a stable government, because the fear is if nobody agrees with the nomination of this candidate, then at the first occasion, there could be a censorship vote in parliament and the new government would fall. So this is kind of a real conundrum, considering that none of the parties or of the blocs has a majority. The one that came first is the Alliance of the Left, but Macron considers that they don't have a real majority in the country. And then there is the far right. Of course, Emmanuel Macron don't want to give them like the keys of power and nominate a far right member as prime minister. And then there is his own party who came third, and in a way is not relevant anymore and cannot really have a prime minister because all the other party would say, you are just ignoring the results of the vote.
So it's quite a complicated situation, given the fact that it is generally up to the president, isn't it, to choose the prime minister before we even start talking about, forming the rest of the government. So just explain to us who he has in front of him, who could be an option, given the list of problems that you've just offered us.
Well, nobody knows, Emma. That's the point, and maybe he doesn't still know himself, he is receiving one after the other all the heads of the parties since last week. He's going to meet today with the far-right head of the party, Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella. The hypothesis now seems that it may be someone who is not politically so involved, not a big name of one of the parties. For example, the Alliance of the Left suggested as prime minister a not very well-known civil servant, Lucie Castex, who is the head of the finance department in Paris municipality. So, that kind of profile, it doesn't seem Macron will nominate her anyway. So he may choose someone who is not that very much in view, in one of the parties to try to make compromise. But somehow, there is this feeling or this fear or whatever that the next government won't last much. And somehow all parties have their eyes set to the next possibility, which would be after a year, no government had a stable majority because, as you said, it's an impossible task. Nobody really wants to govern with the other. And then there would be new general elections. And that's what, for example, the far-right party, Rassemblement National, has in views, what happens in a year, new election, and maybe a new presidential election soon. That's, let's say, the horizon for them.
Emmanuel Macron has a reputation for a man who does things at his own speed, either phenomenally quickly in the case of the parliamentary elections in June, July, but also he takes his time when it comes to deciding things. And obviously he's allowed this space to develop over the summer to give himself some time. But has he recognised that the gambles that he sometimes plays, indeed the election that he called for at the start of the summer, was something that really has backfired?
Well, no, not as openly as you are saying it now. He eventually said nobody won, he didn't say my party lost because it came third, which was kind of a big slap. He just said nobody won because nobody had a clear majority. And I think since then he rather sticks to this line, he admitted, when meeting the leaders of the Left Alliance, yes, you came first. But, normally, in a normal situation, you would automatically nominate as prime minister someone coming from the first political force. He didn't do this, So, yes, it takes his time. I think it takes his time also because he knows it's an impossible task. Everybody knows what the situation is and nobody really sees a solution, or you can see a provisory solution. So that's also why it takes his time, You can say, it's a strategy, but a strategy for what? Eventually he will have to nominate someone. So yes, he was quick on the election. He's slow with the prime minister. And who knows, maybe everything will start again in a few months.
We also have the contributions made by the other parties in all this. As we mentioned at the beginning of this, the left told Monsieur Macron that they want to take the lead in forming the government. That was a meeting that took place on Friday. Macron meets the far right today to try to find out. What do the other parties all want apart from to govern outright?
What they said is that they, apart from the Alliance of the Left, they all say we don't want any government, including minister from the far left party, Mélenchon's party, who is one of the big components of the Alliance on the Left. For them, it's a no-go zone. For Macron's party, for the far right, for the moderate right. So, after they expressed this, Mélenchon himself said, okay, we are ready to have a prime minister from the left, but without any France on board, his party ministers. And so now that's the now situation. And it was kind of a poker game. He says, well, you don't want us, we won't be in the government. So immediately the right said, well, we don't care. It's not the people that matter. It's the program. But, so far Macron didn't say anything about it. So he's kind of cornered, I mean, he's in a situation where he cannot say openly, oh, no, we don't want them anyway. So this is kind of a poker game. And eventually you can reasonably think it won't be a minister it won't be Lucie Castex, like the candidates of the left. But who will it be? It's still completely open, and we may have the answer maybe this week, maybe next week. You don't know with Macron, since nearly 2 months now, France is without prime minister, so it can still last, I don't know, a week or two.
And you're still standing. The interesting thing is what you've just mentioned there is that the consensus is that there should be no one from the far left. Up until the elections, the greatest fear the greatest threat perceived by most people had been from the far right. How much of a role do they now play?
They are pretty silent. They are, they are not very vocal. And obviously they are waiting for the next elections. I mean, they came really strong, not as strong as they hoped, like they are the second force, in parliament after the snap elections. They had much more MPs than before. So now they are just waiting, I think, patiently for the next election. So when will they be? As I said, there is this strong possibility that no government is able to rule for a year. There will be censorship voted in parliament. So in this case, new snap election in a year, because this is the minimum delay you have to hold second elections. And that's when they hope their moment will come again. So for now, they are just, of course, refusing any far left minister in any government. But they are not. They say also that they are the first party, and it's true. The Alliance of the Left came first, but as a party, the far right National Rally is the first party in parliament. But they know they won't have a prime minister. So they are not insisting on it, and they are waiting for the next round.
Florence Biedermann on the line from Paris. Thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. Still to come on today's programme.
You're just like Godzilla!
I wasn't even in that movie.
You tried to hit and run!
Why did you do this?
Why did you do this?
He skied into me.
She skied into me.
He's the one to blame.
She's the one to blame.
We'll look back at the highlights of the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. Stay with us on The Globalist, live from Zurich.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
8:23 a.m. here in Zurich. Now let's continue with today's papers. I'm joined in the studio by Noel Salmi, who's travel, culture and sustainability writer, regular voice around the table here at Dufourstrasse 90. Very good morning to you, Noel.
Good morning, Emma.
How's Zurich for you this morning?
Well, a little rainy, but it's been hot, so it's all right.
It is. You're quite right. It's all right, having been touched by the sun. Just in case anybody can hear, there is a large crane being erected outside the window here at Dufourstrasse 90. That is one of the joys of broadcasting from the middle of a city with open windows. Let's have a look at the papers. In a little while, we'll be heading to Berlin to get an update on the knife attack in Solingen. But the NZZ here in Zurich is asking some pretty fundamental questions, isn't it already?
Well, yes, it is. As you can imagine, and you are having the update, the German-speaking papers are all very concerned about the attack in Solingen this past weekend. And the NZZ is asking whether the Swiss intelligence services are up to the task of protecting Switzerland. Even before the attack, the director of the Swiss intelligence services, Christian Ducy, had listed radicalized youth as one of the dangers that Switzerland should watch out for. over 30 people were arrested in Europe so far this year, which is more than the whole of last year. And Switzerland has already seen an above average number of cases. In March, a 15-year-old of Tunisian descent attacked and injured a Jewish person here in Zürich. In April 6th, potential attackers were arrested in Schaffhausen. And they are getting radicalized, as we know, on the internet. IS is going via TikTok, gaming platforms, and Instagram to radicalize these youth. So Dussi is demanding more staff. But the NZZ is pretty critical of the intelligence services. It was already strained by the Ukraine war, and they have been saying since 2021 that they're seriously understaffed. A few years back, 100 staff were added. There's 434 full-time staff in the intelligence services, but there has been, after an internal review, apparently a lot of staff turnover, bullying happening. So it appears that there needs to be a complete overhaul. Some of the biggest complaints are coming from cantonal police who work with specific specialists from the agency, and they're saying that they're not seeing a lot of effectiveness.
It is interesting, isn't it? Because this article in the NZZ very much points the finger at Mr. Dussi, Christian Dussi, who's the head of the Swiss intelligence service.
That's right.
For being given lots more money, lots more staff, but the culture there has led to, I think I'm just reading it here, a staff turnover of up to 9%.
Right.
And the fact that it has been marked by the fact that the Swiss performance has significantly declined. In many other countries, they would just immediately say Mr. Dussi has to go. Is this a likelihood, or is this going to be worked through?
That's a really good question. It didn't. I didn't find in the article any whether his, whether Mr. Dussi's own position is under threat. It seems that there does need to be a real look at that.
Okay. Let's have a look at the Tagesanzeiger and this issue of biodiversity. This is something which is enormously important here in Switzerland, given the fact that I think there's some reports saying that scientists are alarmed by the poor state of biodiversity in Switzerland, which is quite a surprise for those of us who don't live here and who naturally assume that the love of nature is something which is absolutely inherent to the Swiss spirit. But this is a problem.
Yes, it really very much is. Conservationists worry about extreme threats to the flora and fauna if Switzerland doesn't dedicate more of its land to conservation and to biodiversity. But I think one of the bigger issues here is that, or as big an issue, better said, is that Switzerland just doesn't have enough land. And farmers feel really under threat. When in 2020, the smaller cantons, basically the rural cantons, managed to vote down some measures against pesticide use, measures to decrease CO2 emissions, because they say that it directly threatens them. In fact, currently, Switzerland has some of the lowest amounts of arable land per capita. They have,
which is quite a surprise, isn't it? One would imagine that there's acres of the things, but of the stuff. But absolutely, no, this isn't the case.
No, this isn't the case. The population of Switzerland increases, and Switzerland has a lot of mountains and a lot of lakes. And when you actually look at how much land they have available for farming, it's not that much. It is 450 square meters per inhabitant. In the EU, the number is over 2,000 square meters. It puts Switzerland on a par with Israel, which is 60% desert. Anecdotally, I see it when I drive my son to school. You will see cows herding in places that would be a medium-sized lawn in the United States. They really are scratching for whatever kind of land it can get.
Has any solution been put forward for this one? Because you have the very loud voices from those who say we need to increase Switzerland's biodiversity. But as you have just illustrated there, everybody's fighting over those medium-sized lawns, including the cows.
Yeah, everyone is. Well, so Switzerland has managed to increase its forest cover in recent years incrementally, but there's also has an increased population, which is chipping away at its farmland. And in fact, one of the other goals of Switzerland is to have agricultural self-sufficiency, and the percentage, it's still over 50%, but the percentage of food that it produces at home is decreasing year over year. And this particular referendum to increase the amount of land set aside for conservation is set to be voted on September 22nd. And my guess, it's probably not going to pass.
Noel Samy, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. We're coming to you live from Dufourstrasse 90 here in Zurich. The time here in Zurich is 8:30 a.m. A quick look now at what else we're keeping an eye on today. Hamas says it's rejected new conditions put forward by Israel in the latest round of talks to try to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza. It casts further doubt on the chances of a breakthrough in the latest US-backed efforts to end the 10-month-long war. The Reuters news agency says one of its staff covering the war in Ukraine has been killed in a missile strike on a hotel in the east of the country. British safety advisor Ryan Evans was one of 6 Reuters employees staying at the Hotel Sapphire in the city of Kramatorsk, which is under Ukrainian control but near the front line, when it was hit. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said negotiations are ongoing with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey and Switzerland regarding a second summit on peace. President Zelensky also said he told India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi during a meeting on Friday that he would support India hosting the second summit. Kiev's currently trying to find a host among the countries in the global south. And a new law allowing Australian workers the so-called right to disconnect has come into effect. It allows people to ignore work communications after hours if they so choose. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now, a 26-year-old man has turned himself into police, saying he was responsible for this weekend's knife attack in the German town of Solingen. 3 people died and 8 others were wounded at a festival marking the city's 650th anniversary. Well, Andrew Bulkley is co-founder of 20% Berlin, a newsletter for Berlin's foreign population, and he joins me now from the German city now. Very good morning to you, Andrew.
Hey, good morning.
Just bring us up to date, please, as to what happened on Friday and the subsequent events, which have been plastered all over the news media. We're seeing scenes of sort of great drama and activity.
Well, it was a 650th celebration for the city of Solingen. It was called a celebration of diversity. And during one of the events, there was a DJ was on stage playing music. Somebody began stabbing people in the audience, and as you said, killed 3 people, injured 8 others, and then oddly disappeared. Usually in these knife attacks, the perpetrators caught right away, but this man was able to get away. As it turns out, he just hid in a nearby courtyard and wasn't found for about a day. He eventually emerged himself and turned himself into police, sort of anticlimactic. But this event couldn't have come at a worse time. They can never come at good times, a terror attack, but there are elections coming up in the former East German states of Saxony, Thuringia, and Brandenburg, and immigration is, like in the rest of Europe, the key topic right now. And this 26-year-old was he had applied for asylum. He's from Syria. His asylum had been denied, and he was supposed to have been deported. And it appears that maybe it was a revenge for not being able to stay in Germany that he made this attack. But also the Islamic State has said that the attack is something they had planned, although it doesn't look like they're actually linked. But authorities are looking into that right now.
Indeed, let's just examine that for the moment. We'll come on to the immigration issue in a moment, because that's a really, really big problem for Germany. But let's talk about the significance of the Islamic State claiming responsibility for this. Was this a surprise?
Well, anytime there's any kind of attack here, somebody seems to claim responsibility for it, and more often than not, no, they weren't. There's often leftist attacks on infrastructure, and they're often just people stealing copper cable. The authorities said that the Islamic State, they didn't have any inside knowledge of this attack. They didn't know the man's name. They didn't name him. They didn't seem to really know where it happened. I don't know if it's a surprise. I guess it's a surprise to me to hear from IS at all at this point, but nobody really believes them right now.
And just tell us a little bit more. Let's return to this issue of immigration. This weekend in Germany, we will see regional elections in Saxony and Thuringia. And the issue of immigration and asylum seekers has become absolutely front and centre.
It's a huge issue. It's been a huge issue for a couple of years now in Germany. The center point of this is that Germany does not like to deport people. There are 230,000 people on the waiting list to be deported, and Germany seems to only do a couple thousand a year. And so there's been growing pressure on the government for years to deport people. And it's come to a head this summer as there's been several attacks by immigrants who were supposed to have been deported who weren't. And so now opponents are saying to the center-left government, hey, look, you should have deported these people. You've messed up. It's your fault that these people are able to do these terror attacks because these people shouldn't have even been in the country. And so there's growing pressure to not to just deport people, but also to get a curb on illegal immigration, which now is back at levels that haven't been seen since 2016. So immigration is now the key point in this election, and the party that seems to be the big winner, or is going to be the big winner, is the AfD, the far right AfD, who are sort of in popular culture seen as only a half step away from Nazis.
Indeed, I mean their extreme views are being sort of echoed right across the papers this morning, but also we're hearing comments from the likes of the CDU, the Christian Democrats, who until not too long ago were in power, and we have the CDU's leader, Friedrich Merz, saying we need to have a freeze on the admission of refugees from Syria and Afghanistan. It says it should be clear it is not the knives that are the problem, but the people who carry them around. In the majority of cases, these are refugees, and in the majority of the attacks, there are Islamist motives behind them. I mean, that's pretty strong language from what is considered to be a mainstream party.
Well, who's losing members to the far right? It's parties that are already over on the right, the CDU. So they have to do something to try to keep these members from moving over to the AfD, the CDU. So it's not a surprise that Merz is coming out and saying we need to do more to stop immigration or stop illegal immigration and stop these crimes, because he's losing members to the AfD. So he's going to have to move further right to stop the migration of his members over to the AfD. But also, why hasn't the government actually done more or just been more visible about these deportations so that people like Merz couldn't make these statements?
I mean, a moment ago we were talking about the fact that the Swiss security chief finds himself in trouble for after an examination shows that actually there's discontent among the workers, that performance has dropped. Is there a sense that the German intelligence agencies and security services are doing their job as well?
I think so. I mean, it used to be Islamic terror attacks. It's sort of a grisly way to put it, but Islamic terror attacks used to have many more victims and many more people were involved in the planning. And these days it's just single sort of terrorists acting alone who seem to have no support. And I think that goes back to the intelligence people being able to thwart the bigger plots. I mean, we saw it with Taylor Swift in Austria, and they closed the Blue Mosque, it was called, in Hamburg, that was seen as a center of Islamic radicalization in Hamburg. And so I think that goes back to the power that these intelligence networks have been given in Germany and the success that they've actually seen over the past, let's say, decade.
Andrew Bulkley, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist live from Zürich. The time in Auckland is 18:38. It is 8:38 here in Zurich. Now, climate change is unsurprisingly a key focus of this year's Pacific Islands Forum. Held in Tonga, this gathering of 18 nations will also focus on the growing influence of China in the region. Well, Barbara Drever is a broadcast journalist in Auckland, New Zealand, and I'm delighted to say she joins me now. A very good evening to you, Barbara.
Yes, good evening. I'm the Pacific correspondent at Television New Zealand.
I'm delighted to hear that you can join us as well. Just bring us up to date, would you, about the context or actually what's going to be happening at the Pacific Islands Forum. We have 18 countries covering a vast area, incorporating lots of different cultures and lots of different needs.
Yes, that's exactly right. And one of the problems, of course, is because their needs are so varied. And so when you get 18 leaders to the table and they have to come to some agreement on some quite contentious issues, there's some very frank talking at the Pacific Island Leaders Forum, but it is a place where leaders can come together and as a block group really put their opinions across, especially out on the world stage for important issues like climate change. Probably one of the biggest issues at this Pacific Islands Forum will be New Caledonia, and it's turning into quite a contentious issue. There's been a lot of violence there. Of course, it's a French territory, and New Caledonia, a lot of the Kanak people, they want independence. And so this is a very thorny issue that the Pacific Islands Forum is going to have to try and address and try and find a way forward to broker peace.
Just explain a little bit more about these situations in the situation in New Caledonia and how it could affect the wider agenda at the forum. Just a reminder, France tried to engage in some electoral reform in New Caledonia, and the citizens decided that they did not want it, and indeed it descended into quite a few weeks of rioting earlier this year. How much does that actually cast a shadow over the forum?
Oh, hugely. And really, the latest incident is just a straw that broke the camel's back. Really, it's been going on for years. And one of the issues for the forum is that New Caledonia is a full member. And so the Pacific Islands Forum are very keen to see peace brokered in this country. The forum was set up in 1971, and one of the founding principles is to counter colonial powers. And of course, France is a colonial power here, and with no end in sight to the violence, there is ongoing violence, ongoing tension there. This is becoming hugely problematic for the forum because they need this addressed, because that goes against the forum itself and their principles. So there was meant to be 3 leaders going to New Caledonia just before the forum last week. However, France tried to shape the narrative and indeed do an itinerary for them, these 3 leaders. And of course, New Caledonia were furious about this and said, no, that's not how it's going to work. And so in the end, the whole mission was called off. And so that's really irritated the Pacific Island leaders. They were hoping to get some in-depth information about what's going on the ground, and that hasn't happened. So there's real tension, and that is going to have to be addressed at this leaders' meeting. They're going to have to try and find a way ahead to find some form of, a pathway to peace.
What are the options available to them, given the fact that, as you say, with New Caledonia as a full member of the forum, at the same time you have the strings being pulled very much from Paris?
Yes, that's exactly right. And so what they're hoping that they can provide a safe space for France and New Caledonia to come to the table and find a way forward. New Zealand's been working very actively in this space, looking to perhaps bring everyone to the table, along with some of the forum leads, Pacific Forum leaders, hoping to bring France and New Caledonia to the table in a safe space and say, look, put your anything that you have in mind, put it aside. Let's go straight back to the beginning and see what we can come up with. But at the moment, France is behaving in a way that Pacific leaders are not happy with. So it's going to be a very interesting scenario. The forum has something called the Kitawa Convention, which they could use to help broker peace. It's been used in the Solomon Islands before when there was a civil war going on, and the Kitawa was used then, and forces from around the Pacific, New Zealand and Australia went to the Solomon Islands, and through the years it became a peaceful place. So perhaps that could be something that they're looking at.
Just a reminder that if you are listening live to Monocle Radio, the Globalist is coming live from Zürich, and there are people digging up the road outside the window. So our apologies for that live sound of Zürich getting to work on a Monday morning. And thank you, Barbara, for bearing with us all the way from Auckland. Barbara, just tell us a little bit more about the climate change issue as well, because the last time the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres held a summit with the leaders of the Pacific Islands Forum, there was this big gesture, wasn't there, when he went and stood thigh deep in a suit and tie saying, we have no time left. I mean, has anything actually been done, any kind of positive progress in that respect?
Yes, the leaders have, there's two funds that have been set up. There's around 200 million in each fund. And so the leaders are hoping that at this meeting that they'll be able to put some criteria around the fund. It's to do with what different countries can apply for to help in terms of mitigation. And I mean, I was just not so long ago, I was in Vanuatu and also Papua New Guinea, and you can see it. You can see it right at the grassroots level where houses are being eroded, washed away. And so for the reality, it's happening right here on the ground in the Pacific. And drought is a huge problem. And so the leaders would like climate change to be a massive item on the agenda, and so it should be. But when you have issues like New Caledonia and also the geopolitical influences at the table, and each country has also got their individual items that they want to bring to the fore, you do have an issue that sometimes climate change gets put back a bit instead of being front and centre, which especially the small island nations like Kiribati and Tuvalu, who are facing the worst impacts, they would like it to be.
Finally, Barbara, if we can touch briefly on the influence of China in all this. We have the recent election of a China-friendly government in Kiribati. How much does that complicate things?
Yes, that's right. Kiribati is proving to be problematic, and in fact, they have forbidden any diplomatic missions from going to its shores until Christmas. They've just had their elections, and definitely China has a huge influence there. And we're seeing it in other countries too, like for example the Solomon Islands. They have signed a secret leasing deal with China. Nobody, including the Solomon Islands people, know what the details of that leasing agreement is. And the Pacific Islands Forum meeting is going to be held in the Solomon Islands next year. And we are hearing murmurs that the Solomon Islands may prevent Taiwan from attending and Taiwan has every right to. They're a dialogue partner. So that's going to be a very interesting issue that comes to the fore at the Pacific Islands Forum in Tonga. But yes, geopolitical influence is going to be huge. We've got the US Deputy Secretary of State, Kurt Campbell. He's coming to the Pacific Forum, as are Japan and China and South Korea, all manner of countries, around 21 countries, dialogue partners will be there, all lobbying for influence. And so that really does show you how important the Pacific Islands Forum is on the world stage when you've got all these countries coming in, quite high-level delegations coming in, trying to get lobby for influence.
Barbara Drever on the line from Auckland, New Zealand. Thank you so much for joining us on The Globalist, live from Zurich.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Quick look now at business. Vicky Price is an economist and former joint head of the UK government's economic service. She joins me now. Good morning, Vicky.
Good morning.
Great to have you on Monocle Radio. Just tell us what's the headlines making the world of economics and business, please.
Interest rates, and the meeting in Jackson Hole took place over the weekend, last week really, late last week, where the hint, no, not just a hint, it was almost promised that US interest rates were going to come down in September. They have been held, as we know, whereas the ECB cut rates, the UK Bank of England cut rates, the US has not done so. But of course, it's really worth remembering that in the US there is this dual remit that they have, the Federal Reserve has, which is to not only worry about inflation, but also worry about employment. And there have been some real concerns recently. I mean, first of all, we got some rather weak job creation data. We got also some revisions of how many jobs were created in the year to March 2024, which came as a bit of a surprise. Certainly nothing like as high a figure as had been assumed originally, because that had been sort of semi-exaggerated, if you like, for some reason. So the pressure now is on the US to act, and there is a distinct possibility that they may cut rates when they meet next in the middle of September by 50 basis points. So that would be, quite an interesting move. 0.25% is the one that is mostly expected to happen, the cut, but it could be more. A lot will depend on what other data comes through. In the meantime, we're going to get consumer price data later on this week. We're going to get jobs data again in early September. So they will have that, the latest jobs data coming through. So we might see, in fact, a bit of a wobble in terms of US growth. And if that is the case, then we may actually see a bigger cut than had been anticipated originally.
That's the situation in the United States. The European Central Bank came out and spoke on Saturday, didn't they, about the same problem?
Yes, well, they are sounding slightly more hawkish, but they're not really. I mean, the truth is, of course, that the ECB has cut rates now. Their main deposit rate is 3.75%. That's considerably lower than it is in the US, where it's still in a 5.25 to 5.50, the range of interest rates that they have. Now, the question is, whether inflation is really beaten in Europe or not. And Philip Lane, who is their chief economist, was, of course, before central bank governor in Ireland, is the one who's sounded a little bit concerned about whether inflation really has been beaten. But if you look at some of the data in Europe, and first of all, we got some industrial production or manufacturing data for August, which came out, which wasn't very good. Yes, the composite index was positive. Services are beginning to recover in Europe, but manufacturing is not doing well. Serious concerns about trade ahead, what's happening with China and what may happen in the US if there's a change of there will be a change of president, if I may correct myself. But if it's Trump, where there is a concern that there could be, more tariffs imposed on EU exports, the German manufacturing sector is really rather worried. But also what we've seen in Europe is, apart from the rather slow growth overall, particularly in manufacturing, wages, in fact, slowing down. So if you look at the second quarter of this year, we got wages, which negotiated wages, going down to 3.6% from 4.7% in the previous quarter. That is certainly going in the right direction. But I think, again, Philip Lane was cautioning a little bit about, the extent to which this is happening. Germany is beginning to have loads of quite big demands from unions on wages. So who knows how that will develop. But overall, I think the scene is set for another cut at the ECB as well in September, and they're meeting actually a bit before the US.
So, Vicky Price, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist live from Zurich. Now, to the backdrop of a crane outside our window, we feel as if we're in some sort of creative installation as it starts. And so let's fittingly mark the final day of the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, billed as the world's greatest platform for creative freedom. It's been the place where countless star turns have cut their teeth on stage. To find out what's been happening in Edinburgh, Natasha Tripney is international editor of The Stage. She joined us now from London. A very good morning to you, Natasha.
Good morning.
Great to have you on the programme. Just explain to us, what's the Fringe like now?
So the Fringe is it's an incredible experience to be there. It's this year we had something like 3,900 shows, which is almost of the number that you had in 2019. So you could, in theory, see shows starting around lunchtime and still be seeing them at 1 a.m. in the morning. So it is the largest arts festival in the world. There is nothing quite like it, and it is, as you said, it's a place where careers get started, where careers are launched, and it just has a buzz about it that it used to have in pre-pandemic times. It's quite exciting to see that back.
Is it still? I mean, it is a very, very long time since I was last there, and I think I was in it. But there was an idea at the time that it was very, very ragtag. Does it still get that sort of slightly edgy, thrown together feeling, or is it having to become more commercial now?
I think that's true. I think that the nature of it is so expensive to take a show to Edinburgh. You're talking about tens of thousands of pounds often to be able to do that. Accommodation costs have gone up at an extraordinary rate, particularly after the pandemic. So that kind of sort of ragtag thrown togetherness is something that I think is sort of lacking. You do still see it. It's definitely present in some areas, and there's still a free Fringe. And you see some kind of experimentation there. But I think in order to bring a show there, you want it to be polished, you want it to be finished, you want producers and programmers to be able to tour it and pick it up. So I think that idea of that kind of sort of DIY thrown together thing is a little less present than it used to be.
And how much does that change things in terms of the Fringe's history has always been that place where unknown names get to cut their teeth on a stage and get noticed? Is that something that's still happening this year?
I think that does still happen. I think it is still possible, but more and more, it's people with an eye on making something that is saleable. And while it is entirely possible to be discovered, and I said careers do still begin there, it is a lot harder than it used to be for that journey to start in that same way. You have to bring the amount of money you have to invest in bringing a show there, the amount of team you need to have with you and the publicity to do that. So it isn't quite what it used to be, but those narratives do happen, but they're often more complicated than the sort of simple story of someone coming from nothing and being sort of picked up. Yeah, it's people who have teams behind them, they've worked on that show for a long time. They're often sort of known names within the theatre industry. So it happens, but not perhaps in the same way that it used to.
Natasha, tell us what you saw that caught your eye that you hope will be taken away from the boards of the Fringe and may end up going around the world.
I saw altogether, I was there for 2 weeks. I always go up there with a team of reviewers from the stage, and I personally saw 55 shows over that period of 2 weeks, which is a lot of shows, but also not as many as other people see in the same space of time. And some of my favourites, I really enjoyed a show called Jobsworth, which was a really funny one-woman comedy by Libby Rodliff and Isley Lynn. And it was about a woman who is juggling 3 different jobs all at the same time and trying to not let on to all of her employers that she's doing this. And if you just wanted a really solid 1-hour comedy monologue that was just very funny, very well written, and had real potential, I think, to sort of be developed and taken further, that was, I think, one of my favourites, just from a sort of comedy point of view, because the Fringe is very much still a place for comedy. I also really enjoyed a show called My Mother's Funeral, The Show, which was written by a playwright called Kelly Jones and produced by Payne's Plough, which is the new writing company. And that was about the pressure that working class artists are often under to sort of share their sort of traumatic stories, or to make work out of their own trauma. And this was sort of phrased as the kind of comedy. Again, they sort of turned this quite sort of difficult and traumatic thing into something funny, but it was also a play about grief. It managed to do those two things, which I thought was quite a sort of clever balancing act, to be able to be quite sort of scathing about how the theatre industry sort of mines working class artists' lives for sort of entertainment, but also to make a sort of genuine comedy about the theatre industry, but also to make it a genuine play about what it is to lose a parent, and it's sort of to knit those two things in a very clever way.
Natasha Tripney, sorry to cut you off there, but that's all the time we have for today's programme. My thanks to all my guests and to the producers, Anita Riotta, Chris Chermak and Vincent McAviney. Our researcher was Sana Jumani and our studio manager, Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, more music on the way here from Zurich, and I'll be with you from Zurich at 1300 for the briefing. Hope you can join me for that if you can. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great week.